Hello, can I have your attention, please? Hi. I'm a little short for this. Thank you very much for coming on this beautiful Thursday evening. At least it's not snowing. And first of all, I want to thank our town board members that are here. Jeff Mangus and Mike Bergen, they're here. And then we have an extra guest, Walter Prouty, from the supervisor from Ovid, is also here as well. So thank you for coming, the three of you. And for those of you that know me, excuse me, my name's Michelle Griego-Stillions and Sarah Shantz. The two of us together worked hard. Sarah, raise your hand, stand up, do something. There she is over there. And together we worked to help make this night possible, and we've requested the speakers that you have here tonight, which we're very fortunate to have. Our first speaker tonight is attorney Joe Heath. He's from Preble, New York, and practices in Syracuse. He is an environmental attorney, and he serves as general counsel to the Onondaga Nation. He will speak about the impacts of hydrofracking industry as it relates to the environmental issues. And it's going to be titled, What It Is and What It Is Not. If any of you brought a copy of your gas lease, he could take it with him and he would personally get back to you. Did anybody here bring a copy of your gas lease? So then we don't have to worry about that part. Okay. Joe, as some of you may know, has pretty much circled a large part of upstate New York, giving speeches and presentations on gas leases and on the environmental issues and political issues on this industry of hydrofracking. Our second speaker is a local, Dr. Sandra Steingraber. She's an acclaimed author, ecologist, and recipient of a 2011 Heinz Award, which this was a monetary award which she has donated to the fight against hydrofracking. Sandra lives in Trumansburg, and she is a cancer survivor. Steingraber, Sandra, has devoted much of her research and writing to the link between chemical contamination and human health. We feel very fortunate that we can have both speakers here tonight. So first, we will have Joe, and after Joe is done with his presentation, we'll have a Q&A. We'll move on to Sandra, and then when she's done with her presentation, we'll have a Q&A then as well. There is an outline if you're interested on at least the first part of tonight. If you want to follow along, you can ask questions. When you do ask questions, we are going to ask that you come up to this side, and Bo, you have the extra mic. Bo will have a microphone to hand you so that everybody can hear the question that's going to be asked of the speaker. So thank you very much for coming. Lemonade and cookies over there if you like. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and for inviting me here, and I'll try to get through this without taking up too much time. One of the things I want to convey at the beginning is that this is not your grandfather's gas well. Many of us are familiar with the old vertical wells that just drilled down, they found a pocket of gas, and they pulled the gas out. That's what we all thought about 5 and 6 years ago when the landmen were coming around getting these leases. This is not that. We've got all the easy gas. They've got all those big pockets. Now they're after microscopic pockets of gas that are buried deep in the shale formations that lie beneath us. And I'm going to spend the initial part trying to explain the process somewhat, show you how heavily industrial it is, how ill-equipped it would be to fit in with the beautiful wineries and agriculture and tourism that seems to be the heart of this town. I don't know where it would fit, but it certainly doesn't fit in the Finger Lakes. So after we go over what it is, then I'm going to try to debunk some of the industry myths that we've all heard and try to get through that without taking up too much time. So this is a slide taken In Pennsylvania, within the last year, it's pretty hard to see it, but you can see the size of this drill pad, the size of this waste pit lined with plastic. We'll come back to that, compared to a dairy farm here. This is not what you want in your backyard. I work for traditional Native Americans, non-gambling. The Onondaga Nation is still trying to live the way they did before the Europeans got here. We spend a lot of time fighting to try to get Onondaga Lake cleaned up. It's the most polluted lake in the country, polluted by a century of industrial abuse and dumping of mercury and other chemicals. And what we find in the almost cultural disconnect that we have with engineers that are not cleaning the lake up, no matter what they say, is the engineers and scientists and regulators want us to accept a level of pollution that is just scary. And rather than thinking back to 500 years ago, before the Europeans got here, when every body of water had drinkable water, when every fish that you could get out of that water was edible and didn't have any harm in it, that's what we need to think about. And we call that a vanishing point of reference, because what those scientists and regulators want us to do is move away from that and accept polluted water, polluted air, and polluted land. And we can't accept that. We have an obligation to our children and our grandchildren to think about really clean air and water. Now this is, some of you may already know this. As I said before, they don't just drill vertically anymore. We're talking about high volume, horizontal, slick water hydrofracking. There are shale layers beneath us that contain microscopic pockets of gas that was made about 350 million years ago when this area was an ocean. And in order to get that gas, they have to drill down thousands of feet. Whoops. I have to remember how to use my toys here. And then they turn the drill bit horizontally. They go up to 1 mile in every direction. And then they have to break the gas up, fracture it, frack it, break the shale up in order to get these microscopic pockets of gas out of it. They use millions of gallons of water per frack, according to Chesapeake, up to 7.8 million gallons per frack, hundreds of toxic chemicals, many of them carcinogenic, and sand to keep the little pockets open so that the gas will flow back up. That's if it works well. This is another diagram that shows the same thing. They go down, and then they go horizontally, then they puncture the pipe, break up the shale, and try to get the gas back up. That's the theory. The problem is they have to drill through our aquifers in order to do that. And this is where it's on the surface that we encounter most of the problems. This is not to scale, but you can see that they have to go through our drinking water aquifers in order to get down to the shale. And that's where the mistakes are made. This is a drilling rig coming off the side here, our drilling muds. This is another form. There's many different stages of the pollution that comes off these drilling wells. This is the early stages where they use diesel fuel and other petroleum distillates to lubricate the drill. All of that is collected in waste ponds again and has to be disposed of. You can see that these are huge industrial operations. This was taken within the last year in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you can see this, what was a very comfortable little house surrounded by forest, a little deck here. I think their life is ruined even if this works well. These are the compressors that they have to use. So all of this process, this heavy industrial process, requires 24/7 running of diesel engines, up to 1,500 horsepower per engine. All of that, of course, creates CO2. These are the compressors that are linked in series so that they can build up the pressure necessary to fracture the shale. Again, we don't want this in our backyard. This is from Scientific America. It's another J. Henry Fair picture, I believe. This is, shows you, they like to call the stuff that comes out of the well frack water. Well, this is not water, in my opinion. It's very chemically laced. You can see how thick it is. This is what they have to dispose of, and this is where the mistakes are made. This is a compressor station. If they get the gas, then they have to get it into pipelines. They have to build the pipelines. They use eminent domain to do that. And then they have to compress it. One of these just blew up within the last month in Pennsylvania, and they're constantly leaking methane, and we'll come back to what's wrong with leaking methane in the massive quantities that this industry produces, and volatile organic chemicals. In Dish, Texas, people are suffering tremendously because of compressor stations near their town. People in Pennsylvania are suffering intensively. Most of us, I think, that have begun to understand the dangers of fracking, understand the water pollution involved. There are many, many other very dangerous, very risky aspects of this. Air pollution is one of them. We'll come back to this. The other factor that we are just beginning to hear more about is that it destroys water. It takes water out of the water cycle. There's only so much water here. We don't create water. And this process takes water out of that worldwide water cycle and destroys it. Half the water that they frack with stays underground. So 3 to 4 million gallons per frack is taken out of the water supply that the world is about to start wars over. I just have an article in my briefcase that I haven't been able to read yet about the fighting over water in Southern California. There's a controversy brewing now in Arizona with the Navajo Nation and the Hopis as to whether or not they can get enough water out of the Colorado River. We know that in other parts of the country and in other parts of the world, water is going to become the new oil. And we are fortunate enough to live in one of the most blessed places on earth with clean water and unbelievable lakes, and they're thinking of fracking the Finger Lakes. So it destroys water. And then when they get done with it, they want to destroy the frac fluid that comes out by putting it in injection wells. That's what caused the earthquakes in Ohio. So in addition to the water pollution, it destroys water as well. These are storage pits in Pennsylvania, just earthen holes with plastic liners. We'll go through these quickly. You can see that it's not a very clean operation. The other thing you can see here is that this plastic rips. And it rips partially because they back trucks up to it to take the water out, and then the plastic rips and the toxins leak into the ground and into the aquifers. This is why we have to be concerned. This map shows us all of the shale formations in the United States. And you can see that the combined Marcellus and Utica are the largest formations around the country. That's why we're pretty much at ground zero here. That's why the companies are targeting New York. We hear a lot about the Marcellus shale, but we also need to think about the Utica shale, because this is a map taken out of the DEC document, the SGIS. This is the 2,000-foot depth mark of the Marcellus shale, and they're not going to let them frack into shale that's less than 2,000 feet deep. So in the Marcellus, they're only going to be targeting the southern part of the state. And we don't hear much about the Utica. We've criticized the DEC several times not to be more open about it. This is the Utica shale. You can see that these shale formations run deeper from north to south, and they're named for where they outcrop. And so the Utica shale runs much further north. There is the 2,000-foot elevation mark, or 2,000-foot mark, which shows how deep the Utica shale is. And as you can see, that opens up a much larger territory. That's why they're signing these leases around here and around the places that I live. This is Cortland County. This is where I live. This map was done by our county planning department, and it appeared in the Cortland paper about 1.5 years ago. I'm lucky enough to live up here. This is a dry Finger Lake here, the Tully Valley. Right over here is where Otisca Lake starts, and so the Finger Lakes start right here. We're right on the eastern end. The tan areas are leased, 48%. The green areas that we thought should be safe because they're state forest, many of them are leased as well. 48% of our area leased by 8% of the landowners. If you think that probably as many people don't own land, less than 5% of our county have leased half of it. This is the sole source aquifer that 50,000 of us rely upon for our water. My well goes into that aquifer. And really, we should be seeing the recharge areas for the aquifer as well. 50,000 people, one mistake in that aquifer, we won't have water. So I have a bit of a personal stake in this too. So that's what it is. What it is not, it's not safe. It certainly isn't green. It's not a bridge fuel to renewable energies. It's a bridge to nowhere. I'll come back over each of these. It's not properly regulated. It's not democratic. Takes away the rights of landowners. It's not about energy independence. It's about corporate profits, and we'll come back to that. And really what we have to do is we have to step back and accept the fact that we're facing what I like to call a Sputnik moment, perhaps showing my age, where we're faced with a very serious challenge, and we have to use our ingenuity and our forward thinking to save this planet. We can't think that switching from one fossil fuel to another is a viable alternative. And that's what we're being told by the gas industry, putting all that money into the TV ads. This is a cleaner burning fuel than coal, so it's really a good thing. Well, there are scientists at Cornell that have helped us understand that that's not true, and we need a national energy policy that's set by forward-thinking people that are thinking of the generations yet to come. Not by the oil companies, not by Dick Cheney, and that's where most of our policy came from recently in 2005. And we'll get back to some of the alternatives that we could be using instead of doing this towards the end of my talk. I'll try to run through some of this briefly because we could spend a lot of time. I could fill about 3 hours proving to you that it's not safe. But one way is to quote the companies themselves. All these companies, as lax as the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission rules are, they have to file quarterly and annual statements. In the statements, they're supposed to reveal to their investors the risks in the investment. There's very little regulation behind this, but these are statements taken from the 2010 SEC filing, or 2006 SEC filing of Range Resources, where they admit to their investors, and they certainly don't admit this kind of stuff when they come around and sign leases. I've looked at 600 leases in the last year and a half, and I've never seen any warning about either the process that they're going to engage in or the dangers that the landowner is probably going to be exposed to if they drill on their property. But this is what they tell their investors, and it's night and day difference. This is a little more honest than what they do when they're out there shrilling for gas leases. And they say that the gas operations are subject to many risks: blowouts, explosions, fire, pipeline ruptures, pollution, release of toxic gases, injury to loss in life, severe damage of property, natural resources and equipment, pollution and other environmental damages. This is what the companies admit. And as the other thing that we have to learn, this is about the 2-year anniversary of the Deepwater blowout, because it's another example of the oil industry being out on the edge of the engineering continuum, where they've developed these highly technical ways of exploiting and extracting the mineral resources, but as they get further and further out and more extreme, the risks increase as well. And the company admits that as we begin drilling into deeper horizons in more geologically complex areas, we could experience an increase in operational and financial risk due to inherent high pressure in the reservoirs and unknown downhole exposures. In other words, we don't really know what we're going to encounter down there, and it's risky. Another example of the risk is contained in this May 2010 letter from the Council of Scientific Society presidents, 150 different societies, 1.5 million scientists, and they warned that some energy systems which are being promoted to help climate change have not received adequate scrutiny and may aggravate global warming. And they specifically go on to mention the exploitation of the shale formations as an example where energy policy is out in front of the science, so that we're out there doing things and we don't know the risk. The U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, I often get frustrated with them in some of our environmental work because they're very cautious and they often don't take positions that seem rather obvious. But they wrote a comment letter to the state about the draft SGIS, the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, and they said the setbacks are too short, they're not adequate enough, they're pressurized fluids, could migrate through underground faults. And then they talked about the map that the DEC had used in order to evaluate the risk of the underground faults that could lead to all of these chemicals in the methane moving in directions that are not planned. And they said that it grossly underrepresents the number and extent of the natural faults. Now here's the map that the state used in there. This is again taken from the revised SGIS. This is the newest one that just received 65,000 written comments. And you can see that it looks pretty safe, not many faults. Well, it's a fault map. That's what the USGS says we have to be worried about. How can we be properly planning when the regulatory agency doesn't even know the problems that exist underneath? The other problem that contributes to that is the fact that we have at least 40,000 abandoned gas wells in our state that they don't even know the location of. So it's a nice clean hole down into the ground that could work very much as a migratory path for the chemicals in the methane. This is a comment, a page taken from the New York City's comments on the first SGIS, and it's meant to illustrate that there are naturally occurring faults, so that when you're fracking down here and you think it's going to go up this pipe, you're very likely to encounter a naturally occurring fault that will run amok. This is a picture taken out of the Circus Newspaper. We've seen a lot of these, I'm sure. For those of us who live in the country on wells, just think what happens to your life when your water's ruined, when you can't drink it, when taking a shower becomes toxic, when your children become poisoned, when your animals become poisoned. That's what's happening every day in Pennsylvania. We have some pictures of that. That's what's going on in frack country in Pennsylvania. It's a dangerous operation. I remember 3 years ago talking in the town of Tully. How do our volunteer fire departments prepare for these problems? You're going to have tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel stored, unregulated, out on pads, way back in the hinterland, hundreds of unknown chemicals, and if you have a fire, it'll be a petroleum-driven fire. How do our first responders handle that? No money from the state to cover that. So everybody's heard about DMIC, and it's really a terrible lesson that we can all learn from. Victoria Switzer is a retired teacher there. This is her statement that we're living in a dead zone here, and their wells have been polluted to the point where there's so much methane in their water wells that they have to be vented in order to prevent them from exploding. It's another vent. And then they have to get water brought in. So that rather than just using your well, which all of us know how important that is to us, you have to have the water trucked in. You can't sell your property because you have no water. And so this is what people are putting up with in Pennsylvania. This is an example of the pollution in Hickory, Pennsylvania, the oil slick on a stream. This is a well pad in Pennsylvania taken 1 month apart. These pictures where, if you go back to thinking of that Scientific America picture where it's shooting out, it often overshoots the well pad, going over the well pad into the forest. Here's the trees in August. Here's more tree kill in September, migrating down to this wetland. That's the kind of problem that we're seeing in Pennsylvania. This is the Allegheny National Forest. Those are roads and pipelines, and the fragmentation of the forest and what that's doing to the wildlife is grotesque. Another picture from Allegheny, more. So that's some of what it's doing in Pennsylvania. And part of the reason is that we're told that, oh, you don't have to worry when we're drilling through your aquifer because we're using this really safe method of drilling, putting in a pipe, and then putting in cement, and sometimes we do that again, and oh, we're going to make them do it 3 times, according to the revised SGS. The wells that failed in Dimmock had 3 cement casings. And the problem is, cement fails. This is Schlumberger, one of the largest service industries in the industry. This is from their website. And this quote here, I think I have on the next slide. This is the industry saying that a high percentage of wells in the United States and Canada, around the world, show some gas leakage. And when you see how they think this cement is supposed to work, I think you'll have a better understanding of it. So they drill down, they take the drill bit out, they put a pipe in, then you've got a space between the pipe and where you drilled, that's called the annular hole, and you try to fill that space with cement. You do that by pushing the cement down the center, down to the bottom, and then you try to get the cement to come back up the sides, or thousands of feet or hundreds of feet. When I worked construction in the 60s, and we were building the interstates in Syracuse, we could not pour concrete without a state inspector there to supervise it. And whenever we poured a concrete wall, we always used a vibrator because that's the only way you get it to fill in properly. You can't do that in this situation. Here's a close-up of it. And so that cement is supposed to come all the way back up the sides here, and that's supposed to seal it. Even if that works well and you get an originally tight seal, then you subject it to repeated high pressures that it's going to crack the cement. I keep meaning to take a picture of the cement bridge of 81 in the town of Tully that's falling on the cars after about 50 years. That was built in the late 60s too. So cement fails, and that's how one of the major ways that these wells leak. The Susquehanna River was just declared one of the most endangered river in the country because of fracking, and air pollution is a major problem. Most of us were very disappointed with what the EPA did just recently relative to air pollution and fracking. But in the process, they at least admitted, this is the Times article from about 10 days ago, at least they admitted that there's serious air pollution associating with the natural gas drilling process known as fracking, which releases toxic and carcinogenic chemicals like benzene, clearly a known human carcinogen, hexane, and methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. This is causing health problems and widespread air pollution problems. The air pollution in the Wyoming frack fields, which there are very few people there, the ozone in the winter in the Wyoming frack fields is worse than downtown LA. So air pollution is a major problem, particularly given the amount of asthma problems that we have in our major cities. That's just the same quotes. All right, now we're told, oh, this is a great thing, and this is actually what we find is that Chesapeake was pumping money into some of our national environmental organizations, getting them to fight coal and say that gas is a much better fuel. Well, we do know that when gas burns at the moment of ignition, it's cleaner than coal. But that's only a very small part of the picture that we have to look at, as explained to us by Professors Robert Howarth and Anthony Ingraffia at Cornell, who last March released a peer-reviewed paper that has only been strengthened in what we've learned in the years since. And first they want us to look at, as we should, all those diesel engines and the CO2. But the main problem is the methane leakage. Methane leaks all the time from wells. We'll see some pictures of that. In North Dakota, where they're fracking shale formations for oil, they just throw the gas away. They just flare it into the air because it's too expensive to build a pipeline to get it to being used. And methane is 105 times worse for global warming over a 20-year period. And if we don't correct what we're doing to the climate change problem in 20 years, we have failed. So what Bob and Tony calculated, and has since been very much supported by other studies, is that if you lose 8% of the methane that comes out of these wells, you have a negative impact on climate change over coal. This is a poster that came out in March when they gave their presentation down in last March in Cornell. This is an announcement of it. This is the graph that they used to help show that. This is fracked gas over here. This is coal over here. The purple bar is from the methane, the impact on climate change from methane. And so this is the low estimate, the high estimate, and compared to coal, it's much worse for climate change. So it's not a green alternative because they flare it. They don't know when they're going to hit the gas. Sometimes they hit unknown pockets of gas. People complain about these happening all the time, 24/7, all night. So it's not a bridge to a cleaner future. And the only real bridge is to reduce what we use and get back to using our ingenuity to produce renewable energy. We'll come back to that in a moment. It's not properly regulated. I'm sure Sandra will talk about the lack of study of human health impacts by our state, even though they like to say, oh, we're going to have the best regulations in the country. We're not even going to look at the human health impacts. We have 17 regulators left in the DEC to control this industry. It's the industry, the gas and oil industry, were exempted from most of the provisions of most of our federal environmental laws. The Clean Air Act, Clean Drinking Water Act, Clean Water Act, Superfund, the solid waste provisions. That's what's called the Halliburton loophole, pushed through in 2005 by our then Vice President, what was his name? Cheney. So it's, the EPA is very frustrated. I know the Region 2 Director, Judith Inc., and she has tremendous frustration that she does not have, and her agency does not have, very much regulatory control over the fracking industry. So then we turn to the DEC, which has a three-way conflict, the same three-way conflict that led to the Deepwater Horizon that we saw in the federal agencies. Our environmental law mandates that the DEC should promote this resource. Then they're supposed to turn around and regulate what they're promoting. It's not like an old Woody Allen movie where he was cross-examining himself. And then they're leasing state forests for profit. So they're trying to get profit on one hand, promoting it, and then they're going to regulate how they do that. And the staffing levels are just embarrassingly low. So low that Pete Granis, who most of us had some issues with in the way he was promoting fracking, he's the former commissioner of DEC under Governor Patterson, well, first under Switzer and then Patterson. And in November of a year and a half ago, he had the nerve to tell Governor Patterson, you've just cut my budget so drastically that we cannot regulate the frack industry. He got fired for saying that. So most people are learning now that the real protection that we can get is from our towns, from bans and moratorium from our towns. Most of us know about the struggle that Dryden has gone through. They've won the first round. Most of the lawyers that have looked at this that are objective predict that that's the way it's going to end up when it gets to the highest court. And those towns have a right and the authority to protect their people, to protect their natural resources, using the police power of the zoning laws. And that's where a lot of work is being done. It's not democratic. We talked before about the percentages involved. As I said, more recently, I've been doing a lot of lease work, talked to hundreds of people with leases. Nobody got an honest appraisal of what they were getting into. They're now getting bullied in that their leases are being extended. You have a compulsory integration where even if you don't lease, they're going to drill under your land. Once they get enough of your neighbor's land, they're going to use eminent domain to put pipelines and roads. Those are just some of the rights of landowners that are taken away. And this is the one that really offends me. I'm a veteran from the Vietnam era. I was a submarine officer from '68 to '70. And I've seen our Senate leader, Skelos' law partner, write letters to veterans organizations asking them to promote fracking because it will save soldiers from having to go to more wars in the Middle East. And I'm pretty deeply offended by that. I do a lot of work with returning veterans still. And this is not about energy independence. And that's shown by what I like to pick on Chesapeake because, first of all, they've got a loudmouth CEO that gives us some great quotes. And because they're the major leaser in Cortland and Onondaga County, where I do a lot of my work. So what Aubrey McClendon, he's their CEO, his personal wealth is $1.2 billion. He has a $20 million personal resort in Bermuda. That's what he gets out of this. When he admitted to the Rolling Stone magazine, and we all know that if it's on the cover of Rolling Stone, it's very good stuff. He told them in the first week in March, we don't make money drilling on our leases. We've engaged in a very aggressive land acquisition policy, leak acquisition policy that he calls a land grab. That's what he tells his investors. But what he does with those is he bundles them as a commodity. And he said, we make money flipping leases. I can tell you that we make much more money buying a lease for X and selling it for 5 to 10 times X. And so that's what they're doing. Chesapeake is in serious financial trouble. It may well be on the verge of bankruptcy because it bought all these leases from 5 to 10 years ago. And many of them are not producing very well at all. About 80% of their wells do not produce. They're also expiring in terms of production much quicker because they fluffed up the amount of gas that's down there in order to lure more investors. There are many people talking about how shaky the financial footing of Chesapeake is. Chesapeake is the second largest company doing fracking in the United States, only to Exxon. So what they're doing is they're selling off your neighbor's leases to foreign corporations in huge amounts. The Fayette Shale is in Arkansas. They sold all of that to an Australian company, BHP Billiton, for $4.75 billion. All of their New York leases, they've sold 32.5% of every New York lease to a Norwegian company, Statoil. And they just sold 25% of their Ohio leases to Total, the French energy conglomerate that just had a major blowout in the North Sea. And the reason, there's a typo. The reason they're doing that is that they're going to sell our gas overseas. Chesapeake was the first company to apply for an export license from the Department of Energy. And those licenses are being issued as we speak. Shear Energy got the first license. And so they can get 5 to 10 times more for the gas if they can get it to Europe and Asia. And that's what they're going to do with our gas. It's not about energy independence. It's about corporate profit. Just briefly, these are just some very recent examples of problems with fracking. In January, the EPA found arsenic, barium, and magnesium in Dimick households. How many of us would want any of that in our water? They had to fine a Buffalo area gas company $187,000 for polluting a trout stream in the Allegheny Park. That was from a low-volume vertical well problem. These vertical wells use about 80,000 gallons per frac, very much smaller scale than the kind of industrial mess that we're talking about with high-volume slickwater horizontal fracking. Then in western Pennsylvania, they found toluene, T-butyl alcohol, chloromethane, and trimethylbenzene in well water. And then the revelation that Utah is also now experiencing tremendous ozone problems from oil and gas well. An article about how it's destroying the state forest. We saw some of that, some of the fragmentation so that the habitat is broken up. The animals are disoriented. They're suffering greatly. Here's just one family in Pennsylvania, and then we're very close to the end. So this is a dairy farming family in Summit, Granville Summit, Pennsylvania. the wife of the family, the mother of the family, woke up at 6 o'clock one morning and found 18 trucks idling in her driveway. And down the hill behind her house, there was a drill pad 500 feet from their house. Once the fracking began, hundreds of trips of huge 18-wheeler trucks up and down the driveway. Compressors roaring all day and all night. This is a 24/7 operation, all of it. Drilling, compressing, pumping, trucks. The DEC estimates over 8,000 trucks per well pad, all of that on our rural roads that aren't designed to accommodate them. Just a little aside, we had, in Preble, our industrial development agency just gave a tax break to a paving company that I'm having a senior moment here. And the reason they needed to expand, this is in Cortland, is because of all the road repair that they're engaged in Pennsylvania caused by frack. So you have truck traffic. Gas was flared off once the production began. The flame was so bright you could see it 12 miles away. We saw some slides of that. Her back pasture was a full industrial zone. The water in the trough behind their house stopped freezing because it was so polluted. Her kitchen sink began to sputter and spit. Her husband has lots of headaches. She felt nauseous if she stayed in the shower for more than a few minutes, and she discovered that she could light her water on fire. Tests showed she had methane, radium, magnesium, and strontium. The radium and the magnesium and the strontium and the other heavy metals are naturally occurring in the shale. They're not even what they add. That's what the water brings back up after the frack. And there's naturally occurring radioactive material in there, radium, radon, and the water that comes back is also 5 times saltier than seawater, so that it cannot be run through our municipal treatment plants. There's no way yet that New York has proposed to deal with all of the frack fluid that's going to come out of these wells. And now it's virtually impossible to sell her house, but she gets $70 a month in royalties, so she's taken care of. We won't talk much about lease termination. If you want to have another workshop on lease termination, it's impossible to fit all of that information into the same talk. It's a very unpleasant picture, what the companies are doing, bullying them. More and more of that's going to have to be tested in court. But every lease that I've seen, and as I said, it's close to 600 now, allows them to store gas under the property that's leased. Take water, build compressors. They give away an amazing amount, and it's never explained to homeowners. So now we have to think about, well, what are we going to do for our energy future? What are we going to do when we're thinking about our children and our grandchildren and generations yet to come? What are we going to say 30 years from now when they ask us, why didn't you do something other than burning gas? This is what we can do. We can use our ingenuity. We can use alternative energy. It'll create more jobs, and it's renewable. And it's decentralized, which is a really critical thing. The reason all of this energy generation is centralized is because then the big corporations make a lot of money charging us for it. This is a vertical access wind turbine that's now, they're trying, this is a startup company in Syracuse. It's kind of a futuristic and a past picture there, because this is on Warren Street in downtown Pennsylvania. In the background is the grand old Circus Hotel that's abandoned. But there's a incubation center over here to help new businesses get started on the north side of Warren Street, the east side of Warren Street. This is an 8-foot high, 8-foot around vertical access wind turbine. It can be placed on roofs. Even Bob Conjo put a couple on the, whatever he's calling that mall in Syracuse. SUNY Oswego put a couple on their buildings. The problem is this company can't get enough funding to produce them. I finally tracked down somebody working for the company. I'd like to put one of these near my house because we get a lot of wind. $50,000 to $60,000. So we need those subsidies that are going to the oil industry that are shown in this slide. At least $4 billion a year of our tax money goes back to the oil industries to subsidize the exploitation that we've talked about here. The 5 largest energy companies posted $137 billion of profit last year. Exxon came in at $41 billion of profit, and they can't give that free load up. And we know which party in Washington is fighting to keep it. If we took those subsidies and did what some cities in Arizona and Florida are doing, which are granting mortgages to people to put solar panels on their house so that they can generate power without burning fossil fuels, we could begin to get off our oil habit, and that's what we have to do. And the reason the price is going up is not because this administration is not drilling enough. In fact, they're probably drilling too much. We have 2% of the world's oil reserve. We use 20% of the world's oil. You can't drill our way out of it this way. He did get through the new energy emission standard for cars. That'll save a great deal. That's what we have to do. We have to conserve, and we have to produce energy in a more clean way. We know about wind turbines. We know about solar panels. Most families can't afford to put those on your house either. This is my basement. Now, most areas of my house are cluttered because I don't really have time to pick up all the paper I generate. But this is a geothermal heating and cooling system that was just finished in installation within the last month. And it does not burn any fossil fuel in order to do that. We drilled down several hundred feet to get the amount of mass that we needed, and then you use a heat exchanger, sort of like a reverse refrigerator, to produce enough heat. The red pipes are in the floor, and this was taken some time ago before we put in the hot air system that backs it up. It's a pretty efficient system. Doesn't burn coal or gas. I don't call it natural gas. We don't say natural coal. So we should stop calling it natural gas. It's just gas. This is a great advertising campaign that Earth Justice engaged in. I'm lucky enough to live on a small glacial lake that has enough problems as it is with phosphorus and other pollution. I don't want it to look like that in 5 years. So that's the end of my presentation. I don't know whether it makes sense to take questions at the end. That's, is that how you want to, or do you want to do that now? That's my email contact. The Onondaga Nation has a very good website. You could learn a lot of good history about them and their work. They want me out here working in this way with their neighbors. This is Cayuga territory here. The Cayuga Nation opposes fracking. So if you want to go to the Onondaga Nation website, that's there. And then there's this great group in Cortland, as there are great groups everywhere. That's one of the more inspiring things about this danger that we're facing. It's really inspired tens of thousands of citizens around New York State to get off their couches, to get out and to organize. And it's growing all the time. And I urge you to think about joining it, because it's really critical that we not allow Exxon and Halliburton and Schlumberger and Chesapeake to frack the Finger Lakes and turn it into Texas. The Cortland Gas Group, the Gas Drilling Awareness of Cortland County, has a tremendous amount of background material. You can learn more than you want to know about fracking from there. All volunteer. A lot of retired teachers, professors, but there's farmers. It's a really inspiring group to be part of, as so many other groups are.
Now, come use the microphone, please.
My name is Jeremy Alderson. I am the editor and publisher of the No Frack Almanac anti-fracking newspaper, which is over there along with another anti-fracking paper, and I congratulate them on their efforts as well. I find myself wanting to take vehement exception to something you said, which I feel does a disservice to the anti-fracking movement and really needs to be corrected, and I hope you will retract your remark. Sorry? I think it is utterly inappropriate to be snarking at the Republicans that they're the ones who are standing in the way of the repeal of that $4 billion subsidy to the oil industry. Obama, the Democrat, is the one opening the public lands to fracking, the one who's getting out there and lying about its clean energy, This is a nonpartisan movement that should stay a nonpartisan movement, and we should not be taking sides between two parties which are both disgusting and awful in their energy policy. That's my 2 cents.
I stand corrected.
Thank you very much.
I'm very hard of hearing, so if you don't use the mic, there's a serious danger that I won't hear you. I also can give a lot of advice on hearing aids if you need them.
I'd like to see the moratorium.
Speak into the mic.
I'd like to see the moratorium go through for Hector. But when you attack Cheney in 2005 with a Democratic Congress, House and Senate that approved this legislation, you lose me. You give me a reason not to keep fracking coming here. You've really got to get off that anti-Republican bandwagon.
Well, as I said, I stand corrected. And we have a governor that's going to shove this down our throat, and he's in the Democratic Party. And so I think both gentlemen are correct. Both parties are bought and sold by this industry. We know the impact of Citizens United on our campaigns. It's just about the way it was 100 years ago when Teddy Roosevelt had to try to rein in the corporations that were running America and ruining America, Standard Oil. And the same thing is going on now. So I take that point well, too. We can't get anything through Albany. Part of it is the second floor of the Democrats. Part of it is the Senate. And the problem is we're not getting protected. And you're right, it is a bipartisan mess. So I stand corrected again.
Thank you for coming here tonight. I would like to say that no matter whether we're Democrats or Republicans, I think everybody in this room likes to drink water. And when I first heard about fracking and horizontal fracking 3 years ago, I've been trying to educate myself on what's coming down the pike here. And as a resident here in Hector, I'm very disillusioned that our town board will not grant us a moratorium. And is there any recourse we can do as people that are opposed to fracking? You're an attorney. I thought maybe you could address that. Thank you.
Well, luckily I work for a client that doesn't allow me to go to court, which is a great place for a lawyer to be in. But what other towns have had success doing is going door to door and getting petitioning so that they can help their town boards understand the depth of the concern of the citizens about this. The other situation that we've seen in many towns is that, town boards are elected. And if enough of the town residents and voters want people that have a position on this that's consistent with theirs, that's one way to change your town board over time. I don't think this is, I can't off the top of my head identify anything that citizens can do other than organize and educate and keep at it and keep at it. And, we're having the same problem in the town of Preble. In December, we had a town board meeting where we tried to get the board, and the supervisor wanted it to happen, just to join, I forget, it was the town of Ulysses was trying to get other towns to join as friends of the court in the Dryden litigation, only on the issue of home rule, taking the position that towns had the right to say you can't do certain things in our town. You can't put a nuke plant next to my kid's school. You can't put one of these compressor stations next to my kid's school. And if you want to see the wrong end of this fight, look at what's going on in Pennsylvania now, where I won't say which party runs the state because it'll get me in trouble again, but they just passed a bill ending home rule, saying that towns have no right and that we can put the industry and the regulators can put these pipelines and compressor stations wherever they want. That's not what we want here. We still have the right to home rule, and so we just have to keep working at it. And events like this are very helpful. you know, as I said, you have to keep looking at, just driving here tonight, I can see that your tax base would be severely jeopardized if fracking were going on in this town. I don't know how many wine industry related properties would maintain their value. It looks like a lot of tourism. You need clean water for all of this. You can't have any agriculture if you can't have water. So, you know, the people that are pro-fracking say it's going to bring a lot of jobs. Well, first of all, those jobs go to people that are not from here, most of them. There's a homeless problem in Pennsylvania now. We just have to keep studying this. I've been studying it pretty intensely for almost 4 years, and what I learn every week is shocking. So we just have to keep at it and keep supporting each other. And we find that town boards can be moved once they understand how important it is to their citizens. That's what democracy is about. It's at a level that we have a better chance at. So just got to keep at it.
Presentation, and Sandra's up next, and we'll get to listen to her, and we'll have questions asked at the end of her presentation, and if Joe's still around, maybe for him and Pat as well. So again,